Thanks very much for joining this evening. I hope the boot camp is going well so far. This is my third year of being part of it, so it's always really good to see different faces and meet people who have a great interest in radio. But yes, as Nessa said, I am head of news and current affairs at iRadio and also co-present the afternoon show, so it is kind of a unique role. I've been with iRadio now for 11 years, so it's still learning all the time, but hopefully I've learned a few bits along the way that I can share with you. So I suppose this evening's class even is looking at local news and how to write and research for that local newsroom. Now, there's immediately a little bit of a contradiction because I suppose we are that little bit broader. We've 15 counties to cover. So we're that mix between, sometimes there is the national angle taken, but we are still trying to focus on stuff and news and current affairs that is of interest to listeners in those 15 counties. So this class is going to focus on then sourcing stories. So we'll go through some ideas for where you can actually find your information that you want to share. The challenge or the task that Nessa mentioned is we're going to do a little scripting exercise. So I'm going to have, actually, sorry, Nessa, just to check that I know I sent that assignment on to you for the press release. Did I actually send the press release on to you? So did the students have access to that?
I'd say Teresa's probably putting it up on the thing, but I can email it to everybody right now if that's okay.
Would that be okay? Because it's just, sorry, yeah, I didn't think that at the time. This still needs to be the base for their scripting assignment. Yeah, okay. So you're going to be working on, I'll give you the information in a press release, and you'll be working on scripting on that. And then after that as well, I'll also go through some interviewing 101, some very basic interviewing tips. Okay, so we'll start off then. I would like this to be, I know it's Zoom and it's hard sometimes to be fully interactive in it, but when you're getting started in a radio newsroom, where do you think you might find stories that would be suitable to broadcast? Where might you look? Has anyone got any ideas on that?
Newspapers.
So I heard newspapers, sorry, and then I think someone else said something else then?
Online.
Yeah, researching online, very handy asset. Yeah, anyone else?
Other radio stations?
Definitely keep an eye on what they're doing. Yeah, if they've got something that you haven't picked up on, they're really good suggestions.
Press releases.
That's it. They're very handy. They're very handy when you don't have a team of reporters and to send out. But I know PR is the enemy of journalism in a way. But look, at the end of the day, they are a very handy source. Signing up to as many mailing lists as possible is definitely a good idea. So yeah, you've got a good start of them there. So just on this, I'll give you, and of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There is plenty more to go with, but in a kind of a bigger newsroom, and indeed, well, a lot of the locals as well, you have your reporters, and then your step up, your kind of specialists, your correspondents. Again, I suppose that's more with the national stations that would have their courts correspondent, their political correspondent, but day to day, you're probably looking at your reporters. So you're sending them to events, you're sending them to the courts, you're sending them to council meetings. Council meetings is a big one for local radio stations as well. And when I say markings, that's kind of like, so for example, if you get a marking from a government department and they tell you, okay, Leo Varadkar is going to be down doing a jobs announcement in such a location in your area, you can put that in your diary. And you can send the reporter to that to get sound bites and whatever else and hopefully get an interview. Press releases were mentioned. So yeah, to sign up to as many mailing lists as possible, just to make sure you're getting as wide a range of information as you can. So that would be signing up to, you know, different PR agencies that would have their own clients then and they're giving the information, signing up to the press releases for government departments, their press office, and so on. Then the News Talk Newswire service, so most of, I think pretty much all of the local and regional stations outside of RTE and 2FM are, and Lyric and, you know, the RTE, under the RTE group, are signed up to the News Talk Newswire service, so provided by Bauer Media now. And how that works is they send down stories throughout the day. They've got their team of reporters working on network news, and they're sending down audio across the day. We are obviously signed up to that. We would be quite reliant on that in iRadio because we've quite a small news team. Different stations have a different reliance on it, depending on how big of a team they have in their own newsroom and how much they want to rely on it. Obviously, the News Talk service, sending down everything with very much a national angle. But what they've started to do recently, that's been very, very useful, is a regional hub service. So the idea of that is that stations who benefit from their service and who pay for their service and who use it then start feeding stories back up the way. So an example of this where we've done it would be on Leaving Cert. The day the Leaving Cert started and the day the Leaving Cert results were out, we went to a school in Athlone and we were filing the audio then up to News Talk, and they were sending it down the wire as well. I know online was mentioned, so we have social media as well. So what are newsworthy people saying on their accounts? I know I've already mentioned the press releases of signing up to as many as possible, but a lot of times now you might actually get stuff direct from the newsworthy person that you want to hear it from. They send out a tweet if it's from their verified account, and make sure that it is from their verified account. You know, you can use that. So I see a few chats coming in. Just make sure. That's grand. Everyone has that press release. Thanks for that, Nessa. So yeah, social media, really good one again, and that's where you should be opening yourself up to as many people as possible, like following as many people as you can. So I know for iRadio, for example, we're primarily a music station in a lot of ways, so we're going to be following a lot of artists that we play, so that we're the first to see, you know, when they've gig announcements, when they've something to announce, we're there. Newspapers, yeah, I know they were mentioned, delivered to the newsroom each day. A great source for stories. Obviously you want to give them the credit if it's an exclusive to them, to credit the source where you got it. And then you can develop it further, then maybe develop it, as we're going to talk about, to the local angle that you might want. I have a link in the slides that when you get access to them, you can click through freedom of information requests. So this is obviously something, you know, News Talk would do a lot more of this. They'll be sending out stories that are kind of a network exclusive, and often they are freedom of information stories. So what tends to happen is someone might get, you know, a tip off, or they know that there's a story there, or they're interested in something, and they're applying to the government department or public body to get the information that they need. It mightn't actually be freely available to them. They have to put in an freedom of information request, but the link is there if you want more information on that. Okay, so then we have some ideas of sources of where we're going to find our news. And now we're looking at actually choosing what to run and then shaping it. So again, I'll ask you for any of your ideas of, with all the news that's going on in the world, how might you think about choosing? What might help you to choose what to run for the station you're broadcasting to?
I think proximity to, you know, locals, and, you know, obviously if it's a local story as opposed to national and international.
Exactly, yeah.
I'd say, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'd say like based on who your target audience is in the station, what their interests are. So like trends or artists, celebrities, or even like stuff like like narrowing down like the budget, for example, or housing crisis, that kind of thing. Everything that kind of appeals and relates to the target audience.
Exactly, yeah. That's really good. You've got a good idea of it, yeah.
Something as well that might sound like the opposite to Matthew's, or like something that you find genuinely interesting yourself as well. So I know there's nothing worse than when you have to talk about something you just don't care about. I know it can be part of the job as well, but that might, if there's something that really jumps out that you know you can cover and have a bit of passion and life behind your voice as well with it, that could help.
That's a really good point. And actually where I think that might come in even more useful is, and it's how the dual aspect of my role as well, being on the show, that's where you have the opportunity to maybe delve into something a little bit more that is your personal interest. But you're dead right, it's so much easier to work on something that is actually of interest to you and you have the passion for. So yes. So yeah, you've outlined a lot of what I've mentioned here. So yeah, first of all, I suppose you're looking at, you know, what do listeners need to know? What is the biggest story of the day? What is the most important information? Is there a government scandal breaking? Is it, you know, and very unfortunately, obviously, the tragedy in Creasle last Friday, you know, of huge national importance, obviously of massive local importance as well, but a huge story for the whole country. And so really you're looking at, yeah, what do they actually need to know? What is important for them to know? I know the budget was mentioned there as well. Obviously, while people might feel like, oh, I want to switch off from that, at the end of the day, I think you'll find most people have at least some interest, because it's going to affect what's coming into their pockets and everything else. So, you know, they do still need to know about it. Yeah, coming down then to the interest of your listeners, and I know the target audience was mentioned. So yeah, their age profile, like, do you know what type of person you're broadcasting to in the station that you're working in. So in iRadio, we're looking at a 15 to 34-year-old age group, which is very broad. Like if you think of what a 15-year-old is interested in versus what a 34-year-old is interested in, like there's a wide scope there. So we're probably then looking a little bit more in the middle ground, what someone in their 20s, even to narrow it down that little bit further. And then with certain stories, you could be going at the either end, like, you know, we'll be focusing on, for example, the fact that the junior cert results are still delayed, you know, running pieces on that. Will we get an answer, you know, when are they actually going to be out? Because a significant portion of our listenership will be interested in that. The Leaving Cert, again, as I know we mentioned, we covered it and went to the school for Vox Pops on the day of the exams and of the day of the results. That is something that there's a national significance to it because everyone's gone through the Leaving Cert and they tend to want to share their memories. But for the people who are actually going through it, they're in our listenership region, our age group as well. So we want to target to them. Then what stories can you verify? Like this is very, very important because it's all well and good having a story and that you know is right, but have you actually verified it? Like, have you got first-hand information about it, someone close to the story, a reliable person talking to you about it, and can it actually go to air, because you don't want to run something that you later have to retract or correct, or it ends you up in a bit of legal trouble. You don't want that. And then following on from that, then I suppose you're looking at what stories can you get trusted sources to comment on, because I suppose when you break a story first, or the first time you put the story to air, you'll just have your copy on it. It'll be you, the newsreader, summing up the story. But as the story develops, that's when you need to get voices to talk about it. So you need someone who knows what they're talking about. You need someone who can be trusted, they're reliable, and ideally you need someone who actually will give you a good soundbite, because there are people with the best will in the world who do know what they're talking about, but they're not great at conveying that information for a radio medium. So that's a little consideration to take in as well. So there's some of the things to think about. Then when we delve into more looking at the local newsroom aspect of it, so yeah, have you got the local angle that is most relevant to your listeners? So I know you mentioned there about proximity. That's something you would think of when you were deciding what to run. Like, do listeners in Galway care about this? Do listeners in Athlone care about this? Wherever the location is, you know, Radio Kerry is going to be picking a different story to Galway Bay FM, or a different angle on it at least. So like an example of this, and I've just put one here, F.ie release fairly regular surveys on house prices and rent costs and things like that. If you're working for a local station, immediately you're looking for that regional breakdown. Okay, you're looking for, if you're on Galway Bay FM, okay, what is the Galway angle? You know, if you're on Radio Kerry, as I said, what's there? What is the information that's most relevant to the listeners in those areas? Another example, you know, if there's budget funding or government funding in general announced for like local community groups around the country, and it's been spread around the country, well, the listener in Galway is going to want to know, well, what community groups in my area are going to benefit? So that's a matter of practice, really looking at a story and seeing where can you find the local angle on it. And local people, you know, has a local person done anything newsworthy? Are they connected to a newsworthy event? Have they done something that's of interest? And people say, like, people love the 6 degrees of separation, you know that yourselves, and it's particularly easy to do. It's 2 or 3 degrees of separation in Ireland. I was trying to find a story for you on this that I know was done a few years ago. It was when Chasing Cars was picked as the most played song of the decade, the Snow Patrol song, and the Derry Journal ran a story where it was like, local Derry man is in a band that has the most played song of the century. So it was played on at the time that they were obviously picking out the Derry connection, and that's, you know, what works. Everyone knows they're from Derry, so it worked well on that. So then moving on to, you know, do you have a strong hook for your story? And when I talk about the hook, or I think might call it a peg as well, is it a good reason to run the story? So this would come into play, like if you're in a radio newsroom and you're saying, oh God, I'm trying to think of like an idea for a story to run. I want to pitch something to the editor in the room. Like where you are looking at then is, okay, well, what's going on? What can give me a hook for the story? So I'll just give you an example of this. Like, for example, if it was International Women's Day, which is in March every year, and you decided, okay, I'm going to do a piece on women in minority sports in Ireland, well then International Women's Day would be hook. So if you're pitching that to your editor, you say like, okay, it's not that you can't do a piece on women and minority sports at any year round, but it's going to be extra relevant at that time of year around International Women's Day. You can tie it into that. Another example, just because it was on fairly recently, you know, National Ploughing Championships are on. So you decide, okay, I'm going to track down who is the youngest competitor in the National Ploughing Championships this year. Will they talk to me? Again, that's not going to be very relevant around Christmas time, to be honest. The hook is making it as relevant as it can be. Okay. Great. So then we're looking at getting a story actually ready for broadcast and shaping it into, so whether you have the information all in a press release, whether it's something you went out to an event and you got an interview with a person at a particular event and you now need to like shape that into a story. Well, ultimately what you need to do is decide on your top line. So this is the first sentence that the listener is going to hear. And it can be tricky to get right because it needs to be the most newsworthy information. It needs to be the point of the story, but it also needs to be given in a way that A, is clear enough, and then also will attract listeners' attention, okay? So you are looking at what you have and how do you shape it into just one sentence? How do you get the information you have in one sentence? So it needs to be clear. And then when you have your top line included or stated, then you're looking at what other information actually needs to be included here, okay? So you don't have the luxury of too much time in radio news. If you think that, you know, probably an average radio news bulletin is 2 to 3 minutes and you've got maybe 4 or 5 stories in that, you're condensing a lot of information to a short amount of time. Martin, I see you have your hand up there.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if someone is kind of pitching a story, obviously a script type story, you know, what's the maximum lines that you'd recommend, you know, for any editor or head of news to kind of give their time?
So I would be summing it up. So if you're going to like send an email to someone, and it depends obviously if you're actually in the newsroom with the editor, but I would say like if you could sum it up in maybe less than 10 sentences, I would be looking for. Like, can you sum it up like that, short and sweet, and short sentences as well, so not like big chunks of information. So yeah, I would say between like, because we'll be looking at it actually on how to script copy a little bit later on, and that's between 3 and 5 sentences. That's kind of how much time you have to sum up the story. But yeah, short and sweet is definitely the key when you're pitching, like picking the most important information and keeping it as short and sweet as possible.
Okay.
So yes, so on that then, what other information needs to be included after you've picked your top line? And as I was saying, you don't have that much time in a radio news script, so you're going to try and keep it as relatively short and sweet. So that means, again, really analysing the information you have. If it is a press release, as you will be working on later in the class, okay, distilling a lot, like 2 pages of information into those 4 or 5 sentences. We've already mentioned this about contacting for comment. So who are you going to get to talk to you? You know, starting building your contacts list now is, you know, a really good idea, because you never know. And like, media in Ireland is so small. So if you interview anyone, it's a really good habit to get into just at the end of the interview or at the start, just saying, here, would you mind if I kept your contact details on file, just for any potential future interviews? 9 times out of 10, they don't have a problem with it. And it's just good to get their permission, because particularly if you're in, like if you have a centralized contact system, which might be in the newsroom as well, that you obviously, with GDPR regulations, you have to make sure that you have the information like password protected and all that, but you do need to get their permission to save those contact details on file. So for example, generally any interviews I do, and especially if it's someone who's like, who I find, oh, actually they're an excellent speaker on it, ask them for their details and save them. And then to sum all that up, you're condensing and explaining as simply as possible. Okay. So, sorry, yeah, sorry, I have that. Okay, yeah, so your basic script again, as we said, the most important information in the story. And Derek, I see you have a question there.
Yeah, sorry, I was just in relation to that, just, you know, with the GDPR and keeping people's information, would you have to get that in writing, or would it just be enough to get off them in?
So what happens, where it's handy with us, is because we're obviously recording our interviews. So I normally, like, you let them know you're recording. And then
Yeah.
we would say either at the start or the end, once it's on record, then we'd say, look, can we just make sure that it's okay for us to keep your name and contact details on file? So that's how we would generally do it, but no harm for you to say, if you wanted to pop them an email, just so you had it in writing to be on the safe side. But we would normally in the recording, and then if there was ever any issue, you could refer back to that then.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks. That's great.
No worries. Stephen.
Hi, Fionnuala, how are you?
Hi, Stephen, how are things?
Quick one. Do you know regarding like it just followed on from Martin's question there? Is there jobs where you can be a freelance news reporter where you can kind of pitch it to different stations, or is that more what like News Talk, the Wire you were talking about? Is that more what that is, where there's kind of a lot of people putting them in centrally?
Yeah, what I would say is like when the Wire service is not 90% of it is News Talk's own employed or Bauer Media's own employed journalists. So people, they're either like a lot of them are freelance, so there is that, but they're, let's say, doing shift work for News Talk or Today FM or across the Bauer network. And then in terms of us feeding stories to the Wire, yeah, that would be someone, you know, who's working in a different newsroom then, feeding up the way and they're feeding down the way. So in terms of pitching, I'd say it's more like it as obviously I suppose doesn't work the same way as print journalism in terms of the way we work anyway. You'd probably be looking to more do to get into the, for example, if you did want to work at News Talk, you'd be looking at more contacting them as like a newsreader or offering yourself up for freelance shifts, as opposed to going in with an idea. Like you'd be looking for the shift work as opposed to saying, oh, I want to work on this one particular story. You know, where that might come in more is if you were looking to do more of like a documentary thing and you were saying you were pitching to a particular show for that. But in terms of the newsroom, getting your foot in the door, the best way to go about that is to make yourself available for actual news reading and reporting shifts where you'd be working across a range of stories. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, the way you put it regarding like writing pieces for newspapers, it doesn't happen that way. That made it very clear. Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the typical way anyway. Yeah, not in my experience anyway.
Cheers, thank you.
No worries. And Martin?
Yeah, and just expanding on that a little bit, I'm just wondering, I know you said that, you know, it's not like traditional print, you know, where you pitch, but how, like, I mean, how do you go about getting your foot in the door if you have no previous broadcast experience? You know, what do they expect?
Okay, well, from my point of view, what I'm always looking for is actually enthusiasm. Like, and I know that sounds really, really basic, but if you can show you're eager, unfortunately, media is an industry where you do start off and it's very easy to fall into the trap of like unpaid work and doing bits here and doing bits there. And I know that's not right. I completely appreciate that. Unfortunately, that there is that element of it to the industry a little bit. What I would say is do a short demo, because on radio, like your voice is your talent. I know if someone sent me in a short, I keep it short, by the way, about a minute. Don't send anyone like over 3 minutes of audio. They're just not going to listen to the whole thing because they'll get a sense in the first 30 seconds or so whether, you know, you have something there to work with. So I would say literally even a demo on your phone, I certainly, if someone was to send it in, I wouldn't be looking for amazing audio quality. I'd obviously want to be able to hear them. But like have a listen. What you could do is you could have a listen to a particular station that you are interested in getting into, listen to their bulletins and maybe try and do a demo that emulates the bulletin style that they do. So if they have a particular intro, like if they say their name at the start, do it that way. If they say their name at their end, do it that way. Like I would always listen out for someone who kind of let me know that they weren't just firing out a demo anywhere. And I know that's probably what you're doing, but at the same time, I would try and target it a little bit because I think you're going to get the program director or the news editor attention more if you let them know, okay, I've tailored what I'm doing. So yeah, short demo and find out the right person to send it to as well. I think that's an important one. Like I often get a lot of music sent to me and I know it's hard and everything else, but I'm like, okay, you need to probably do your research and find out who's the right person because I don't deal with music, you know? So just,
So would you say then that a recording, a demo is more important than a CV, or do they, I suppose, complement?
Personally, in my view, I actually think it is, because I think you can teach a lot and it's harder. You can obviously voice train someone, you completely can, and you can have massive improvement, but I'd like to hear someone's raw talent. Now, having said that, I definitely send in your CV with like anything relevant you might have done. So if you have any sort of experience with like using Audacity to edit audio, or even Adobe Audition or anything like that, or if you've done any media experience whatsoever, or any social media experience, like definitely include it in your email. But I personally would be looking for the demo. That's what I'd want to hear. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm just butting in really just to echo everything Fionnuala has said, and just to remind you that we're doing a full session on putting a demo and CV together, and we're doing a full session on how to pitch your ideas to radio stations. So we will cover all of that. The course that you're doing now is a really good way of getting your foot in the door. You will be doing work experience, so you will all be in radio stations. And Fionnuala said your contacts book, absolutely really important, even if it's a contact on your phone and not an actual physical address book anymore. But yeah, I had the number of a chickenologist in 1992, and in 1998 when I needed a chickenologist, I had that number. So it's really important. We will cover CVs, we will cover demos, we will cover pitching ideas, we will cover how to get a job, and you will have a placement. And just remember that, you know, News Talk might be the dream, but iRadio is a really, really good gig, and Fionnuala is somebody who hires people for radio. So listen to what she's got to say about the news, and we'll deal with CVs and everything as we go. Is that okay? Okay.
Perfect, that's good. I'm also really intrigued about that chickenologist story. I want you to send that on to me. I want to know all about it. Okay, so yes, basic scripting, have we moved on to that? So yes, so yeah, again, the most important information of the story, sharing it as clearly as possible. Simple language. Sorry, Martin, I'm not sure if your hand is, if there's just still a hand icon.
Sorry.
Do you have another question? No, that's grand.
No.
Just check. No, that's grand. So yes, simple language, because, you know, at the end of the day, you have a limited amount of time, and also you have to remember that your listener can't see what you're reading. They're not reading along with you. So they have one chance, like you're not going to be repeating what you said. So they have one chance to hear it, and they need to understand it. What we are definitely trying to move towards a bit more in our scripting and style in iRadio is a more conversational style of read. That's not to say like we're not using slang or anything like that, but we are trying to write more how we speak, because that's what people understand. And I think it helps break down the kind of stigma of like news being, you know, really boring and something you don't want to listen to, if you're actually talking how you speak. I try and hammer this home, and maybe I spend a little bit too much time on it when I'm talking about scripting. I personally have a real grow for the active voice. So I'm not an English teacher, so I don't know how to properly explain it in relation to all the grammatical terms that you should use. But the simplest example I can give you is Gardaí have arrested a man. That's the active voice. Someone has done something, instead of a man has been arrested by Gardaí. So I'm not saying that the passive voice is wrong. Generally, the active voice, it lets you use fewer words. It's more direct. So you use fewer words, therefore saving you time. And the clues in the name, active, I just think it sounds more engaging as a listener when you hear someone write in the active voice. So when you're taking on your scripting challenge this evening, try and focus on that. How can you say something? Someone has done something. Gardaí have arrested a man, instead of a man has been arrested. And keep the whole story to 4 or 5 sentences. That's for your copy format, which is what you're going to be doing this evening. And then just to sum all that up, clarity is vital. Again, that they can see your script. You're the only one that can see it, so you have to make it clear for them. How would you tell this story to a friend? That helps you be more conversational. And then what is your station style? So I know in iRadio, I think the first time I put a style guide together was actually only probably 3 years ago now, and it's kind of a living document that we contribute to. So for example, something that would be in our style guide is we always say finance minister, public expenditure minister, instead of minister for finance. And it sounds really simple, but we're cutting out that for, as in, so we're just reducing the word count. So that's just a very simple example of something that we have on our style, that it's the job first and then the minister. We'd also always say junior minister instead of minister of state. Again, reducing words where we can. So as I've outlined here, writing for radio would be a bit different to writing for News Talk. Now, I know that sounds a little bit contradictory when we do get our stories from them, but we do make an effort to kind of rewrite the scripts that we get They're obviously perfectly well written, but it's just to maybe simplify them that little bit more for our listener and suit our style. Another example of this would be when we do our weather. We take our weather from the met.ie website. It's very wordy what's there, so we try and reduce that down and get it into those 1 or 2 sentences. And ultimately the aim is to give as much information in as few words as possible. The next slide, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's something that does tend to trip students up. I teach a module in NUI Galway as well, and every year I think it just catches a few people. But I'm just showing you this so that when you do go into a radio newsroom that you say, oh, it does stick with you that you heard this before. All we're going to be worrying about for this evening is copy. So this is between 3 and 5 sentences in your story, okay? Very short and simple. It's the most basic story format that you can have. Your copy and clip is between 3 and 5 sentences of your story, but now you're adding in that soundbite. So you've contacted someone for a comment, and you've cut probably a max 30-second clip from what they've said. 30 would be quite long, actually, probably even to be looking to keep it to around 20-25 seconds, but you've added that clip or soundbite into your copy. Your voicer then, and this is just the shorthand for voicer, it'll make sense to you whenever you start using Burley, so don't worry about it now. You've got your 2 to 3 sentences which sum up the story. Newsreader reads those live on air, and then you've got a pre-recorded report by a reporter. So the most common example of voicer would be a court report. So if you ever listen to any of the Bauer stations, they'll have Frank Rainey as their courts correspondent. So the newsreader will sum up the story in about 2 sentences. Someone's been charged, someone is on trial, whatever it is. They'll say Frank Rainey reports, and they'll play the pre-recorded reports that Frank Rainey has filed for them. A donut is the same as a voicer, except within the report part, it includes your clip or soundbite, for example, a vox pop or a clip from an interview that the reporter did. And then your package is the longest form content that you're going to have on radio news. Again, it's the 2 to 3 sentences summing up the story that the newsreader reads live. Then go into the pre-recorded report by the reporter, and within that report there is a couple of different sound bites from an interview that the reporter has done. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just want to acknowledge that these are the different ways that your story could be presented. So for example, when you start off when you're getting a breaking news story, for example, you're going to script copy first. It's the easiest to do. It's summing up the story. And then as the story develops and continues throughout the day and maybe more information becomes available, that's where you delve into your voicers, donuts and packages. For example, and again, just because it's recent news, for example, today there would have been copy on the Creasla funerals, but Mairead Cleary, a News Talk reporter who was at the funerals that were taking place today, she was then filing packages as well. So it's just a different way of telling the story. Okay, I'll just show you sample copy now before you take on your own task, just to go. So this is a screenshot from Burley news reading system that the majority of stations use. I know there is Radio Nation as well. Personally, I don't have experience of that, but it's the system that stations use to put their stories together. So here we have what's called our slug, and this is basically just the filing system of the story. We can see that was filed for the 6 o'clock bulletin. They're using the 24-hour clock. Its topic is Tusla and birth as well. You have copy because it's the copy format, and these are the initials of the reporter who wrote the story. Okay, if you see this here, we've got 4 sentences summing up the story. So this is one from a couple of weeks ago. The Child and Family Agency says issues around access to a website for people looking for their birth records have been resolved. So it's actually quite a wordy sentence, but it does sum up the story. And everything else is your background information. The website, which only went live today, gives information to adopted people who are looking to find out about their early life, care and medical history. However, some people from outside Ireland and the UK couldn't access the site for a while. Tusla says it's tried to follow up with anyone who's been affected and has apologised. So short and sweet, has all the information you need, but still only those 4 sentences. So it's kept quite short on that. Okay, so your in-class task then, if you have the Abbott jobs press release, so I think Nessa sent it on, so you should all have it. I want you then to script 1 copy from the Abbott jobs press release. So to sum up, it's between 3 and 5 sentences. That's what you want in it. Keep your sentences short, simple. Again, give as much information and as few words as possible. Try to concentrate on using the active voice more than the passive voice. So someone did something, and only include the most relevant information, because there's a lot in it. I think it's about 2 pages of a press release, if I remember correctly. So what we might do is, because I know you're going to be submitting this for your assignment for next week, so we might give 15 minutes to work on it now, if that sounds okay. You can then finish it in the coming week for it to be submitted. And we will finish off the class then by looking at some basic interviewing tips and then any questions you have. The most basic tips I would have for interviewing that hopefully will help you as you go on through the boot camp, and then hopefully make it into a radio newsroom as well. So at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is get as much information as you can out of your interviewee, whoever it is. So more than likely, you're only going to have a limited amount of time with the person, and the more newsworthy or high profile or important the person is, the less time you're going to have with them, is probably the reality of the situation. So you need to maximize that time to make sure you get what you want out of them in the interview. So for example, if it's a music artist, if it's a minister or a politician, I'd say you're probably looking at max 10 minutes would be my experience. They'll tell you that. You can obviously try and push it a little bit, but what I'm saying is if you're told you get 10 minutes, you're not going to get a half an hour with them. And another note on that, I'd say 10 minutes feels very short when you're in the interview, but when you're actually listening back to the audio, it is quite a bit to work through. So bear that in mind as well. So when trying to get as much information as you can out of your interviewee, that means your preparation is vital. So research who you're going to be talking to, basic things, have the time and date right of the interview if it's something that's being set up a little bit far in advance, and correct contact details, like something as simple as that. Make sure you have the right information for them. Since the pandemic, we have actually moved to doing a lot of our interviews over Zoom because it's so handy, and also in general, the audio quality is better than a phone line. But what I would always say, and it's something that I still make a mistake on quite regularly, is if you're setting up an interview over Zoom, make sure you get a contact number for them, because there's nothing as frustrating as you started the meeting, they've completely forgotten about it. You're sitting there being like, oh my God, will you please log on? And you've no way of getting in touch with them. So always ask for a contact number as a backup as well. The open-ended questions then, the question starts with who, why, where, what, when, or how. So these are questions that your interviewee can't give a yes or no answer to. They have to expand a little bit by the nature of the question. The exception obviously is when you need a yes or no question. You're interviewing a local TD about something and you're really trying to nail them on the answer. You need them to give a yes or no answer. That's the exception. But generally, when you're trying to draw information out of people, the who, why, where, what, when, and how will help you. It's particularly helpful when you're sent out, as you inevitably will be, doing vox pops, so chatting to people on the street and trying to get as much information as you can out of them. Like, for example, if you think of the answer they might give to, is the cost of living crisis affecting you? Yeah, it is. How is the cost of living crisis affecting you? They have to give an example because you've asked them how. And let me tell you, people generally don't want to do vox pops. So the easier you can make it on yourself, the better. Martin, you have your hand up there. So sorry. Oh yeah, you're just
no, I'm just wondering, I suppose just going back to an earlier point that kind of feeds into this, but just say the voicers, if someone was submitting, say, one to your radio station, what's acceptable? Is it okay for someone to submit, say, audio from, recorded on their phone? Do they have to have a special HN Zoom recorder? Or
so yeah, now,
for interviews?
With the voicers, that's more what an actual reporter would be submitting. So generally, if you are working in the freelance reporter arena, you probably would have either your Zoom H4n or some you actually have invested in your equipment, or the station might be actually providing equipment for you to bring out with you. So the voicer, the audio quality is obviously takes on that little bit more importance when it is something like a court report or a political report, that's meant to sound a certain way. We what I would say, and I think I would mention later in terms of remote recording, and I know there was one app mentioned earlier that I hadn't heard of, so I definitely took a note of that, but I find actually the Voice Record Pro app on the phone quite good. Voice Record Pro, again, I think there is a premium version that you can pay for, but I've been using the free version, and I do find that quite good. Now granted, it's still only as you're limited by the quality of your phone and the surroundings of your recording as well. But yeah, that's what I'd say. But yeah, if you're actually working for a station, Martin, they probably will provide, you know, some sort of equipment. But again, freelance reporters do tend to invest, I suppose, in as much as they can in something like a Zoom H4n recorder. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Then you're looking at where and when and how, I suppose, the audio will be used. So, for example, is it just for a news bulletin? Like, are you ringing someone and saying, I need 30 seconds off you, that I'm literally going to use in the next 5 minutes, like I'm running into air, I just need something very quick? Or is it something that's, you know, a longer form interview that's actually going to go out on one of the station's more content-based shows? So, for example, you know, an interview I did a while back with Simon Harris, I think I got about 12 minutes with him in total. That was obviously way too long for anywhere. You know, when you're on a music station, that's a lot of talk. You don't want that much talk. So what we did was we shaved about 5 minutes of it into a newsfeed special, and then we cut sound bites from it to be used just in copy and clip versions in news bulletins throughout the day. What we also did was transcribe some of it for our online content as well, and we had some stuff for our social media. So yeah, try to think the audio that you're getting, where is it going to end up? Is it going to be on a show? Is it going to be purely for news? In which case you can be a little bit more like, just take 2 or 3 minutes of someone's time. But if it's a longer form piece, you know, where is it actually going to end up? Then adapting your interviewing style to suit the interviewee and the topic. So to follow on from this, yeah, an interview with a politician is going to be different to one with a regular person, or I suppose an interview with anyone who's media trained is going to be different than with someone who isn't. So you need to adapt your style accordingly. So one example, you know, you would give, if it's someone who is a politician, a public figure, someone who's in authority, well, you're probably going to be that little bit more, I won't go so far as to say aggressive, but you're going to be, you know, leaning forward, you know, really engaged in it, trying to pin them down on things. It's going to be maybe a harder interview in that sense. With someone who, you know, for example, someone who's been through a traumatic experience, but they want to share their story, you're going to have to adapt so that you're being, you know, more compassionate, that you're inviting them to talk a little bit more, that you're actually sitting back maybe a little bit and not being too afraid of silence, like letting that develop and letting them speak when they're ready. Stephen, you have a question there?
Yeah, this just following on there from what you said there in terms of, you know, your politicians who obviously, you know, for a couple of years you could interview them regularly and, you know, you want to push them. I suppose, how do you balance that relationship between, you know, wanting them to pick up the phone every time you want to speak to them? I know politicians always want airtime, but at the same time, you want to push them. Where do you find that balance of keeping them at contact without pushing them away, but also getting a story?
Yeah, well, I think, look, at the end of the day, they have to realize that you have a job to do. So I suppose from us, we're not a massively investigative style of, you know, reporting or whatever. So it would be like, I suppose from my experience with the ministers, I have interviewed, for example, Simon Harris, or it was Joe McHugh back when he was education minister a while back. And we had Micheál Martin in as well. Like, this is where I suppose your preparation comes into it as well. Like, you will have agreed, I suppose, in my experience anyway, a general outline of topics you're going to cover. And that's not to say, you know, you're giving them pre-approval of what was asked. It's not that, but it's more that, you know, they do deserve a chance to be briefed on what you're actually going to be talking about, so that they're prepared from their side as well. So I would say, yeah, with the local angle of it, you know, I do think at the end of the day, it would be rare for a local TD to be, you know, completely blacklisted in their local station. There is that symbiotic relationship there. I mean, look, there's always those interviews you see that are aggressive and people love to see the presenter tearing into someone, and there is a useful element to that to a point, but I think you can also put across your point respectfully, and maybe it's a little bit more about refusing to let them evade the question by, you know, continuing to respectfully ask it. You know, I don't think it's necessary you need to be shouting them down, but I think if you go in there with that level of respect, you should be able to maintain a good relationship with them.
Yeah, no, just even thinking of like the likes of Damien Tiernan, like with WLR and USBRT, like some of his political shows can be quite, you know, I'm almost surprised they want to come back, you know, that
yeah. Well, I think again, yeah, I suppose they're analysing the cost and the benefit to it. Like, at the end of the day, that is their medium for communicating with the voters as well. And I suppose someone like Damien Tiernan, again, when you've built up your reputation in the industry to that regard as well. You know, politicians will know what they're going to get from you. And yeah, you should never be giving them a soft interview. You know, they need to be pressed. But I think it's a matter of, yeah, if you have, and that's where engaging with the interview is so important, because you could be in an interview, have your list of questions written down, and you're kind of so nervous about like, oh God, have I covered everything there now? And you're not really listening to what they're saying. So if you're listening to what they're saying and you feel like, okay, they're not answering that, and you know, you can call them out on not answering it. You can say, well, look, you know, I don't think that's very clear to our listener, you know, and give them the opportunity to come back with it again. But I think if you're maintaining your basic level of respect, I think that's always important, no matter who you're interviewing.
Cheers, thank you.
So again, on that then, knowing what topics you want to cover. So you're leaving room for movement. For example, if an interview is going to take off on a wild tangent, that you can go with that. And it's not that you have to stick to a particular script, but if you know what topics you want to cover, well, it makes sure you don't go too wildly off and forget something that was actually quite important later on. And where all this feeds into then is preparing a brief. So a brief, I would say, keep it to about 1 or 2 pages, 1 page ideally, but sometimes for like complex topics, you'll have more documents that you're looking through. For example, if it's a post-budget interview, you're going to be looking through, you know, the different information that was announced in the budget. You're going to have a lot there. But in general, you want your brief to include your interviewee's full name and title, the date and time, and how you're doing it. So is it Zoom? Is it over the phone? Do you have the contact details right? Summing up all the relevant background information. So this, I suppose, is more relevant to an interview that you've a bit more time to prepare for. Let's say you know it's going to be happening the following day. That's a great amount of time to get. You can research, you know, other articles, other interviews they've done. What have they been talking about recently? What newsworthy items have been published about them? You can include that, and make sure you're including like the most relevant stuff as well. And then also include your potential questions. So that's how your brief can help you there. And then on the actual tech side of it, I mean, testing your equipment. So if you're lucky enough to be in a radio studio setup, just going in maybe 5-10 minutes beforehand, testing your mic levels, testing, you know, doing a quick Zoom test, make sure your audio is working. Then when you get on the call or the Zoom with the interviewee, check the audio levels of both. You can hear them, they can hear you. I know this sounds so basic, but it does happen where you run in with a minute to go to the interview and you realize something isn't working, and it's very stressful. Where you can, a useful way to check the audio levels is to get the interviewee to state their full name and title for you and how they want to be referred to. Again, that's good practice to get into, because it lets you check, oh, the audio levels are okay there, I'm happy with them. But also that you make sure you get them right when you're actually referring to them in the interview later on then, or in the news piece, that you're giving them the right name and title, because that's just, you know, a basic matter of respect. Paying attention during the interview, it's something I can be guilty of if you're trying to think of 5 different things at once, but actually listen to what they're saying. I'm very just old school, love to have a pen and paper beside me. Just make your little notes. If you're watching the recording go along and you see they say something at 2 minutes and 12 seconds, literally write down 2:12. And even if you don't remember what it was after, you go back and you check that and you've made your little notes. And again, this comes back to, I suppose, interviewing someone who's got media training. Be persistent. Really don't let them avoid or evade the question. And if they are, we'll make sure the listener knows that, you know, that you have tried to ask the question. If they're not answering it, then that you've really tried your best to get that answer. In terms of equipment then, if you don't have access to a studio, I would say the Zoom H4n recorder. If I know, look, there's an expense to everything, but just the Zooms are probably an investment in your radio career. I know, look, they are old school now, because so much, the phone quality has improved so much, but at the end of the day, they're actually a very handy piece of equipment to know how to use, and the audio quality is good from them. Your phone as well, the Voice Record Pro app, which I mentioned a little bit earlier on, find that very, very good. The quality of it, I do find it very, very decent. And then I think, was it Lizzie mentioned TW Recorder? Was that what I wrote down earlier just at the start of the class? So yeah. Don't have experience of it myself, but sorry, Lizzie, you were saying it was good?
Yeah, we use it in LMFM. We don't have the stuff out with us. I use the Zoom ones as well, though. They're so good.
Yeah, they're very good recorder. But yeah, that's just one app that I find very helpful. And then your remote options, then Zoom app, obviously different to the Zoom recorder, but when you're setting up your interview, just click, when you go into the options of the interview, there's an automatically record meeting option. Just make sure that's ticked. There is an option as well to record separate audio files. Don't think we need to get into that for now, but just for the audio editing side of it, sometimes it's handy to have, let's say, your audio in one file and your interview in another, just so they're not crossing over. Clean feed is one. We use this actually for our outside broadcast. That's how we link back in to studio when we're out. We use a clean feed link. There's an option for a paid account, but you can get a free account as well. And again, the audio quality is quite good. And something I should mention on the Zoom app as well. When you're recording it, it will be an M4A file. Sorry, motorbike there, going there. I don't know if that was picked up. It will come in as a .m4a file, which the latest version of Adobe Audition can open, but earlier versions generally can't, and Audacity can't as well. So if you just Google convert M4A to MP3 audio, that'll be fine. MP3 is probably the easiest one to work with. So that's just a note on the audio that you get from your Zoom recording. And one I found very handy as well, again, since the pandemic, and I kind of use this for stories, like, for example, a charity event where I'm like, okay, to be honest, it's just the time that I would have to take to like set up a proper interview, do a quick Q&A. It's as quick to just send my questions via email or WhatsApp the questions to them. They record their answer on their phone and fire it back to me, and I edit. With the caveat that a lot of people who do that tend to, and I am reading a script and this is my answer to the question. That's a very easy trap for them to fall into. But if it's someone who kind of has a bit more natural way of speaking, WhatsApp voice note is a great way to just get a quick soundbite off someone and you can edit it there. So they're just some remote options that I found handy over the last while. And then I think that's it from me. So any questions on any of that? I know you were good to ask during the class, which is great. I like to see people engaged in it, but if there's anything else.
What do you think is really important for someone who wants to work in news? Like, I know the voice is really important, but if they have a voice and they have some bit of experience that you think you could just work with this person, they can edit, they've done a course like this, they can do something. What do you think are the kind of personality trait? Like, I mean, I'm trained as a news journalist, and I've often had it said to me that, you know, the difference between a news journalist and a psycho, there's very little difference because you're there covering the worst of people, and, you know, you're constantly going, how can I make a story out of that? But what do you think, characteristics wise, you'd be looking for in someone in news?
Well, again, I think I would say the enthusiasm and the interest, like wanting to. So we have a great student. We've actually two great students on placement with us at the moment. But for example, last week, one of them, there was a walkout happening at Maynooth University over issues at the university there, and it came in the press release. And again, we don't have a big team of reporters to send, but straight away she said, "Oh, will I go? Will I go to that? I'll be there." You know, rather than, you know, she had that initiative to say, oh look, I'd love to go. She had the interest, she wanted to do it. So I think being interested is a great start, because it's very hard to make yourself do something that you don't want to do. And then in terms of, you know, the building your contact side of it, because again, that's important, I suppose, being the type of person, you know, being open to people, being willing to communicate with people, and, you know, because that will help you obviously when you're interviewing as well, that people kind of want to chat to you. So I suppose the interest, and again, this is something I can be guilty of as well when you're in radio this long, like always being open to learning as well, like always wanting to try to learn something new, because it's evolving so fast. The way we do things is evolving so fast that if you're kind of constantly keeping track of what's going on, that's a really good asset to have, that you're not like, oh, I learned that in college, I learned that in the bootcamp grant, don't need to look at it again, because it is always evolving.
Okay, great. Listen, Fionnuala, thanks so much. The presentation is going to be on the Learning Hub, guys. The assignment is there. You have you have it emailed to you anyway, but it'll be there as well. And sure, look, just give it your best shot. Have a listen to the radio stations, have a listen to iRadio, listen to how they do it. Use that to kind of inform how you write it. And Fionnuala, that is a great introduction to news. The 101 I love, especially at the end of it. It's just like, no messing, do this, you'll be grand. So thanks Megan for your time.
You're more than welcome. Look, it was a real pleasure to be part of the class. So look, as I said, there's you know, it's news@iradio.ie. If you ever want to get in touch, drop an email. As I said, if you're reaching out, don't be afraid to, because as I said, media in Ireland is small, so never always open to hearing from people. So thanks yourself, Nessa, and thanks to everyone on the class.